The night my son stood in front of a room full of family, friends, and neighbors and announced plans to sell our family farm without my permission, something inside me broke. I wasn't just hearing about a business deal. I was discovering that my own son had been making plans behind my back for months, and while everyone applauded what they thought was progress, neither my son nor his wife knew that one forgotten document was about to bring their entire plan crashing down. Let me take you back to how it all started. My name is Harold. I'm 72 years old, and for most of my life, everything I worked for was tied to one place, our farm. 600 acres of farmland that had been in my family for generations. My grandfather worked that land with horses. My father worked it with machinery. He repaired himself, and I spent 50 years expanding it, protecting it, and building it into a successful business. When my wife Evelyn was alive, we treated the farm like another member of the family. Every decision we made revolved around protecting it for the next generation. There were years when drought nearly ruined us, years when crop prices collapsed, years when we worked from before sunrise until after dark just to keep everything running. But we survived, all of it. And through those difficult years, we had one dream, that someday our son would take over. My son grew up on that farm. As a little boy, he followed me everywhere. When he was 10, he'd ride beside me in the tractor for hours. When he became a teenager, he spent summers repairing fences and helping during harvest season. By the time he was in his 30s, he knew the business almost as well as I did. I trusted him completely. There was never a question in my mind about who would eventually inherit everything. Every Sunday, my son came to the farmhouse for dinner. Even after my wife passed away, he kept coming. We'd sit at the same kitchen table, eat together, talk about the farm, and make plans for the future. Those evenings meant a lot to me. After losing my wife, they became something I looked forward to every week. Then my son met Lauren. At first, I was happy for him. He had spent years focused almost entirely on work. Seeing him excited about someone felt like a blessing. Lauren worked in real estate. She was confident, ambitious, and always seemed to know exactly what to say. People liked her immediately. I tried to as well. The first time she visited the farm, I noticed something unusual. Most people who came out there asked about crops, equipment, or the history of the property. Lauren didn't. Instead, she asked how much land values had increased over the years. She asked about zoning laws. She asked about nearby development projects. She asked what neighboring farms had recently sold. I remember standing beside an old property map hanging in my office while she studied it carefully. Then she smiled. "This land has to be worth a fortune," I laughed. Politely. "It took 3 generations to build." She nodded. Then she said something that stuck with me. "Imagine what developers would pay for it." It wasn't a terrible comment, but something about it bothered me. Because when I looked at that farm, I saw family history. When she looked at it, she saw a price tag. Over the next several months, I started noticing a pattern. Every conversation somehow returned to money, housing developments, commercial growth, land values, investment opportunities. Whenever I talked about the history of the farm, Lauren would quickly steer the conversation somewhere else. I mentioned it to my son once. He laughed. "Dad, she's just business-minded." Maybe he was right. That's what I told myself. Then the Sunday dinners started changing. At first, my son missed one, then another, then 2 in a row. There was always an explanation, a meeting, a client, a project. Sometimes he'd call, sometimes he wouldn't, and when I did speak to him, the conversations felt shorter, different, distracted. One Sunday evening, I called to ask if he was still coming. Before he could answer, I heard Lauren's voice in the background. "We won't make it tonight. Not he. We." I hung up, feeling strangely disappointed. Months passed. The distance grew. When my son did come around, conversations about family quickly became conversations about business. And more often than not, Lauren answered questions directed at him. One afternoon, I asked my son about plans for next year's planting season. Before he could respond, Lauren jumped in. "We've actually been discussing some bigger opportunities." I noticed the word immediately. We. Not him. We. My son just nodded. The more I watched, the more uncomfortable I became. Still, I kept my concerns to myself. I wanted to believe everything was fine. Then came the first serious conversation about money. My son walked into my office one afternoon looking nervous. He closed the door behind him. "Dad, can we talk?" Of course. He sat down for a few seconds. He stared at the floor, then he finally said it. "I think we're missing a huge opportunity." I already knew where the conversation was heading. Explained that nearby developments were expanding, property values were rising, investors were looking for land. Then he asked whether I'd consider using part of the farm as collateral for a luxury housing project. I stared at him. Why would I risk farmland for that? His expression tightened. Because it could make us millions. Us. There was that word again. I leaned back in my chair. We already have a successful business. He looked frustrated. "Dad, you're thinking too small." That comment hit harder than he realized, because for most of his life, everything he had came from that farm. The same farm he was suddenly treating like an obstacle. I declined. Politely. But he left angry. And that bothered me more than the request itself. For years, we had disagreed about things. We'd argued. We'd debated. But he had never looked at me the way he did that day. Like I was standing in the way of something he deserved. After that conversation, things got worse. At community events, Lauren started making little jokes about farming. One evening at a fundraiser, someone complimented our operation. Before I could answer, Lauren laughed. "Harold is sitting on a gold mine and still pretending it's 1985." Several people chuckled. I forced a smile. Then I looked at my son. He said nothing, not a word. That silence hurt more than Lauren's joke. As the months passed, developers started appearing around the property. Surveyors showed up. Strangers walked fields with my son. Vehicles I didn't recognize parked near barns and equipment sheds. Whenever I asked questions, answers were vague. Nothing official. "We're just exploring options. Don't worry about it." The man who built the farm was being told not to worry about it. And somehow, that became normal. The isolation happened slowly. That's what made it dangerous, no? Single moments seemed serious enough to confront, but together, those moments changed everything. Then came the anniversary celebration. Friends and family organized a large event honoring the life my wife and I had built. Together, nearly 200 people attended. Workers, neighbors, relatives, business, partners, people who had known us for decades. For most of the evening, everything felt normal. I shook hands, shared stories, looked through old photographs. For a few hours, I forgot about the tension. Then Lauren walked onto a small stage near the front of the room. A large screen lit up behind her. I assumed it was going to be family pictures, maybe photos of my wife. Instead, architectural drawings appeared. Luxury homes, private roads. Clubhouses, swimming pools. The room filled with applause. I froze. Lauren smiled proudly. "We're excited to share the future of this property." Property, not farm property. Then my son stepped onto the stage beside her. The moment I saw him standing there, my stomach dropped. He started talking about opportunity, growth, investment, progress. I kept waiting for him to explain, to tell everyone this was only an idea. He never did, because it wasn't an idea. It was a plan. A plan everyone seemed to know about except me. I stood up slowly. The room became quiet. "My son," I said, "when exactly did I approve selling this farm?" Silence. Lauren looked at him, rubbed the back of his neck. Then he sighed and said something I'll never forget. "Dad needs to stop living in the past." A few people laughed. Nervously, I felt every eye in the room turned toward me. My son continued, "We have to think about the future." Standing there, I suddenly felt like a stranger. Not the founder, not the owner, not the father who spent decades building everything they were talking about just an old man standing in the way. I didn't argue, I didn't yell, I didn't embarrass myself. I simply picked up my coat and walked. The drive home was silent that night. I sat alone in my office. For hours I replayed everything, the questions, the secrecy, the distance, the developers, the jokes, the announcement, the humiliation. And somewhere around midnight, something changed. For months I had been making excuses, because I loved my son, because I didn't want to believe what was happening. But sitting there alone, I finally accepted the truth. This wasn't a misunderstanding, this was betrayal. The moment I admitted that, everything became clearer. I opened old filing cabinets and started reviewing documents, not because I expected to find anything, I just wanted answers. Then I found a folder I hadn't touched in years. Family Preservation Trust I opened, started reading, then read it again. By the time I finished, it was nearly 2 a.m, and suddenly everything looked different. Decades earlier, my wife and I had placed the entire farm into a preservation trust. Every acre, every structure, every asset. And according to the trust documents, I remained sole trustee. No development could move forward without my approval. No land sale could happen without my signature. No transfer was valid without my consent. Sat back in my chair and smiled for the first time all night. Not because I wanted revenge, because I finally understood something important they never actually had: control. The next morning, I called my attorney. Within days, every development discussion was frozen. Every pending approval was blocked. Every developer received notice about trust restrictions. I also updated succession plans. My son was removed from automatic inheritance transfers. Not forever, but until trust could be rebuilt. I never announced any of this publicly. I didn't argue with anyone. I simply enforced the rules that already existed. The reaction was immediate. Investors disappeared. Developers backed away. Meetings were canceled. Phone calls started pouring in. Then my son showed up. He stormed into my office. "What did you do?" I stayed calm. "I protected the farm." "You killed the project." I looked him directly in the eye. "No, you tried to sell something. That wasn't yours." His jaw tightened. For a moment he looked like he wanted to argue. Then he left. Over the next several weeks, things unraveled quickly. The project collapsed. The money disappeared. The promises disappeared. And then Lauren started disappearing too. According to my son, she became distant almost overnight. The excitement was gone. The future she'd talked about constantly no longer existed. Arguments became common. Then one day she packed her belongings and left, just like that. Months of confidence vanished in a single afternoon. A developer I had known for years asked to meet. Halfway through coffee, he told me something that explained everything. Lauren had already negotiated private commissions connected to the development. Future profit percentages. Sales, incentives, personal financial rewards. If the farm had been sold, she would have made a fortune. Suddenly, every strange conversation made sense. Every question, every push for development, every attack on family traditions, every effort to isolate my son. She never wanted the farm. She wanted access to the value inside it. A few weeks later, my son came to the farmhouse. This time he wasn't angry. He looked exhausted. We sat at the same kitchen table where he'd eaten dinner his entire life. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then he finally broke the silence. "You were right." I said nothing. His eyes dropped to the table. "She left because the project failed." His voice cracked. I ignored everything because I wanted to believe she loved me. I understood that feeling, because I'd spent months ignoring warning signs too. We talked for hours, not about money, not about ownership, about choices, responsibility, trust, consequences. When he left that day, nothing was magically fixed. But it was the first honest conversation we'd had in a very long time. Over the following year, my son returned to work, not as future owner, not as successor, as an employee. He showed up early, stayed late, helped workers, stopped talking about shortcuts, stopped chasing easy money, and slowly, He started earning back trust. Then harvest season arrived. Employees gathered before sunrise near the equipment sheds. The air smelled like soil, fuel, and freshly cut grain. I stood beside my son in front of the crew. Everyone expected me to announce retirement plans. Instead, I handed him a folder. Inside were management, responsibilities for the upcoming harvest, not ownership, responsibility. He opened it, looked at the pages, then looked at me. A few seconds passed. Finally, he turned toward the workers. This farm exists because of my father. The crew became silent. My son swallowed hard. I almost forgot that. Nobody spoke. He continued. I spent too much time thinking about what I could get from this place instead of what I owed it. Then he looked directly at me. Thank you for protecting it when I wouldn't. I nodded. That was all. No speech, no celebration. The lesson had already been learned as tractors rolled toward the fields and the crew returned to work. I looked across the land my family had spent generations building. The farm was still there. The legacy was still protected. And for the first time in years, my son understood why. Some people stay loyal only while benefits are available. But true character shows itself when those benefits disappear. And sometimes the strongest thing a parent can do is protect a legacy until their child is finally ready to value it.